Number 6 on our Cache Valley Media Group's list of the top 25 Aggies for this season is Byron Vaughns, the defensive end. He's a junior from Fort Worth, Texas, and he transferred to Utah State from Texas, where he played 10 games down there. Feels like he never had a chance to play there. Last year, as the season went on, more and more of a contributor, and he was the Mountain West Championship game defensive MVP. An explosive player. He can make plays off the edge, wants to be a better guy as far as strength and stopping the run inside. He wants to be a guy who I think can be a real leader on this Aggie defensive team. Number 11 on the roster, Byron Vaughns is number 6 on our list of Aggies for this year.
Yeah, Byron Vaughns at number 6. I actually had him at number 4. So pretty close where he ends up here. But here's a guy who played in pretty much every game, started the last 5, and as we've been saying many different times and in many different ways, he was part of that defense that got better and better as the season went on. And part of the reason that defense was more impactful is because of guys like Byron Vaughns, who he himself got healthier and understood the defense more and absolutely affected opposing offenses and got after it.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned him coming on late last season. I was looking it up, and over the last 7 games of the season, he had 8.5 tackles for loss and 4.5 sacks. On the season, he had 11 tackles for loss and 4.5 sacks. Had about the same number of tackles before and after that kind of cutoff point, which was like just after the Colorado State game, so Hawaii and onward. But pretty much all of his impact plays, sacks and TFLs, those kind of big plays where you're being an impact player, that was coming later in the season when he was helping the defense really realize its true potential for the most part.
Yeah, he, as a defensive end, he had 6 passes knocked down, which tied for first on the team. He had 4 sacks, maybe 4.5 sacks, which was second on the team. 10.5 tackles for loss, which is third on the team. And that was on a good defensive pressure team with other guys who were very experienced around him. And he only started 5 games. So when he was in, he was making an impact and grew in his role, and he's just getting better. One of the other things that I really like Byron Vaughns, why I put him high on my list, is besides just the physical traits, 6'4", 225 pounds. He's a big body, he's fast, but his personality, he's a very vocal leader and has energy that is infectious for his teammates.
Yeah, and for a team that lost several big leaders, that's him and Halle are probably going to be 2 of the biggest leaders. I mentioned yesterday when we were talking about Halle, he's going to be one of the big leaders. Well, he's right next to Vaughns, or maybe they'll be slightly offset depending on where they line up their formations. You're going to have 2 of your biggest leaders on that defensive line, and they're both guys who will produce. When we talk about the last half of the season, how Vaughns was doing, you get a full season of that. That's borderline the numbers that Nick Henniger was putting up, where he had like 20 or 20.5 tackles for loss, and I believe he also led the team in sacks. I don't have that in front of me, or maybe I do. Let's see if I can look it up really quick. 8 sacks for Henniger. I believe he led the team in both those categories, tackles for loss and sacks. So you look at Byron Vaughns, you try and extrapolate that last half of the season, then he's just about where Nick Henniger was last season in terms of his production. And so we talk about some of the biggest losses. Henniger was one of those biggest losses in all that production, all that impact he had. So if you can suddenly replace that by saying, all right, well, Vaughns is just going to do what Henniger did last season, that's huge, because suddenly one of the biggest losses on your defense is just negated by somebody you already have, and he's somebody that we know can produce.
Yeah, absolutely. And that strength of that Utah State defensive front really is one of the key strengths of this team this year. We've got a number of guys in the top 10 who are on that defensive line, defensive front. Byron Vaughns comes in at number 6. Halle Motuapawaka was number 7. And so that's a couple other guys who are pretty close to it. That's a really big impact for what this team is about and how they developed over the last year. Yes, some of the key contributors from a year ago are gone, but there's not like this big, huge drop-off because no one else is there. There are other guys who were making impacts a year ago, and they're going to step into those roles in their own way, in their own right, and be a real big part of this Utah State team this year.
Yeah, and so I'm really looking forward to seeing how Vaughns and Grishik, then you throw Patrick Joyner in there, who's obviously he's going to be able to rotate in to spell these guys. So you have 3 defensive ends who are all pretty solid. That's a great thing to have where when one of these guys needs a rest, they can come out and you're not really dropping off in production. And so I'm really interested to see how Grishik and Vaughns work off of each other. Vaughns, you mentioned he's a bit of a bigger guy, has a bit more strength. Alfred Edwards kind of talked about this after the scrimmage where they're both different. Grishik's definitely the speed guy, coming off the edge, using that to his advantage. And Vaughns, longer arms, a bit more strength. Still obviously some speed like you like to have most defensive ends have. But you're basically going to be having 2 different guys who have 2 different styles, and you can try and work with that. See if you can scout the defensive tackles and see which one's maybe weaker against speed. Maybe this one's, not as strong. Maybe he struggles with the bull rush or different things like that. And so having that kind of, the versatility and the being multiple, all the buzzwords, you kind of have that at your defensive end positions. You can try and use that to your advantage.
So that's Byron Vaughns. He's number 6 on our top 25 Aggies for 2022.